they are welcome to keep their video on for the duration of the discussion. But we do ask that you mute your microphones when you are not speaking. Our panelists have also been briefed on their time constraints, 10 minutes. I'll be sure to keep them on time so that we leave sufficient time for the end of questions. Depending on the number of questions that come through, we may have to group those questions. And if we do not have time to respond to all questions, we will find a way to communicate and send them forward for you. So we'll now go right into our first presentation, which comes from Mr. Mariano Brown. And he should have just about 10 minutes and will be on, and we'll be monitoring that. So Mr. Brown is the managing partner of a management consultancy practice, Leader Management Services Limited, providing advisory services for companies that require assistance in strategic planning and corporate turnarounds. Mr. Brown has considerable experience in the financial services sector in the region and has arranged several private sector funding placements, having served as managing director in 2 commercial banks in Barbados and held senior management positions in the banking sector in Trinidad and Tobago. He has an undergraduate degree in economics from the University of the West Indies, an MBA from Manchester Business School, and he's also a chartered accountant by profession. A former president of the Barbados Bankers Association as well, vice president of the Chartered Institute of Chartered Accountants of Trinidad and Tobago, and treasurer of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of, could you just hold a second? My document went up. Sorry about that. Accountants of the Caribbean. Mr. Brown serves as non-executive director on the board of a publicly listed company and lectures at the Arthur Lockjack School of Business in Trinidad and at the Cave Hill School of Business in Barbados. He currently hosts weekly programs, radio programs, and deals with topics of economic development, writing regularly on issues of political economy in the region. Also, Mr. Brown has been a past member of cabinet of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. So we welcome Mr. Brown, and Mr. Brown, do express your perspective for us this morning. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. Sorry for that long introduction. Next time, just say, I think everybody should know who I am by now. So we'll just cut it short next time.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation, which is up. Yes. Okay. Here we go. Now, these statistics belie the seriousness of the virus. The lockdown measures have really been put into position, social distancing have been put into position, in large measure because our healthcare systems cannot avoid or can't deal with what we would call a peak demand situation. Because the world has 7 million people, so at 4 million, we're talking about 0.0 point something percent. But at the same token, when you look at the capacity of healthcare systems around the world, and this virus hits in a clump, so it gives you intensive care units. Now, we've discovered that our intensive care unit space, even in big metropolitan countries, are not sufficient to be able to cope with the demand. Before COVID-19, there were approximately 4,000 intensive care beds in the UK, as an example. And in the case of North America, about 150,000 ventilators. Now, when you start having, or numbers start going up in the hundreds of thousands and you have to treat them on intensive care purposes, then they have to create all sorts of different and special capacities. Now, the difficulty with that is that what you could get is social chaos. And that's the reason for the lockdown measures. The lockdown measures are as much to push the curve down, but at the same token to reduce the demand for scarce hospital space. That's the real problem. And the difficulty with that is if everybody shows up at the same time and you're not given what you wanted to, what you will get is disorder. Disorder in those circumstances quickly turns out into social upheaval, social chaos. Right? You know, you could picture demands if you close the bank and everybody wants to get in the bank, you know what happens. Same thing for healthcare services. And in the same way they don't have enough hotel beds, we don't have enough police. So that the lockdown measures, as a result, to flatten the curve, spread out the demand, but at the same token has an immediate economic impact. Companies laying off staff, global decline in stock markets, and we've seen, and if you want a good barometer in terms of the demand, with the fall off in energy demand, which has fallen off by something between 25 and 30%. And you'll see what has happened to the prices of oil and gas and so on the international stock markets. So that's the position. And the net effect of that, of course, is that we find ourselves in the false distinction of economic necessity as distinct from healthcare. And that is the difficulty now in terms of opening up the economy. So what happens and what do we do? And how great is this impact? Well, I've put it into perspective for you. I've used the IMF World Economic Outlook numbers. And the global financial crisis, which took place in 2008, which was a fairly worldwide phenomenon affecting all the OECD countries, really led to a global decline of 0.1%. The Great Lockdown in 2020 is leading and is estimated to cause a decline of 3% across the world. And this is to be compared with the original number forecast from the IMF, which was about 3.5% last year. So you're talking about a 100% turnaround. And the IMF has also said in a recent publication, actually as last week, if you look at the bottom part of the slide, this crisis isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and it's likely to get worse. The healthcare crisis has not been solved. All right, this is a quotation on the 7th of May at a webinar. It's also said that, for example, that the economic forecast since at -3%. If you look at the top of the screen, that little slide there, it says that the global economic has worsened. The IMF has also gone on to say that they expect 70% of the countries for which they've given a forecast for it to be worse than what they're forecasted. Now you take that into perspective. In other words, the lockdown is having a very serious economic impact across the world. The last country not to have reported any cases of coronavirus was Lesotho. And yesterday they recorded their first case. So now it's full scale. Everybody has it in one form or fashion or another. No industries have escaped, none. Right? Commodities, gas, tourism, transportation, service sectors, agriculture, clear across the board. And that's also seen now in the difficulties because in the northern hemisphere, this is what you would call harvest season. Right? This is a primary period in which you're going to getting your out of winter crops to market. And you need agricultural labor. Where does agricultural labor come from? In large measure, it's imported. In North America, in Canada, for example, you would have seen in the papers at least 3 weeks ago that Canada was prepared to open its borders to receive migrant labor out of the Caribbean. Our ministry didn't seem to understand or know anything about it. And you had a little brouhaha that cropped up in the papers. It doesn't seem to have been settled yet. But the bottom line is Canada is open. Germany certainly is open to East Europeans to pick. And the same thing is happening in England. North America is facing the same problem as we speak. So notwithstanding Mr. Trump's comments with regard to Mexican labor, he needs them. Just to put that in a certain perspective. All right, so this is affecting everybody across the board. In the case of the Caribbean, this is what the IMF is projecting for the Caribbean. -5.2% across the board. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, they expected 4.5%. I think we're going to find that number is small. When the true figures have come, the minister, when he first said that his revenue would go down by somewhere between 5 and 7 billion, that has not, and that would have made it a net deficit of about 12 billion. Then it went up to 15. That was his last estimate last week, Monday, when he was speaking in Parliament. So that's about 15 billion, and it could go up a little bit more. The estimate from most of us who are batting on the outside say something about 20 billion. So that means that 4.5% is only the beginning. So our fiscal situation is going to be seriously impacted. So exactly given that difficult situation, exactly how has the region responded and what do businesses say? This is a survey which was released this week. It comes from the ECA, which is a worldwide survey. It's a survey of 10,000 of its 100,000 members. 10,000 responded. And they're saying that all business leaders expect, with the majority of them, 80%, expect a significant decline in revenues and profit. Employee productivity is identified as a specific area. 1/3 of the organizations are already facing cash flow problems. Now that cash flow problem is concentrated in some industries, particularly those, for example, in entertainment, the travel and entertainment business and the hospitality sector, because those are job-rich sectors. Those are the sectors that account for the largest percentage in terms of the numbers of people employed in part of the service industries. almost everybody is deferring investments. That's particularly true of the energy sector. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, that's going to be very interesting from our perspective, because our energy sector, in a sense, is what drives the economy. And notwithstanding the positive statements which have been made by BP and Shell, the international parents have already indicated deferment of a series of new investment projects across the world. So is Trinidad going to be any different in that regard? Almost all of the businesses, as a result of what is taking place, have a question in terms of what do we plan? What is our planning horizon? What do we do? Right? One of the businesses of which I am a member of the board, we are in the middle of a planning horizon at this stage of the game, but demand and our business is about retail, and we've lost a significant portion of our retail base. But the bottom line is, for us, for that particular company, this is the slow period. So the real issue is what's going to happen for the rest of the year. Now, if the rest of the economy is in difficulty, then by definition, all retail businesses are going to have some issues, right? So what is the impact? Well, people have already started, they've stopped hiring in some instances. Some people have slashed salaries. Some people have maintained them, those that could, right? But the bottom line is going to reflect the employment variable moving forward. So the beneficial number that we've been talking about is unemployment below 5%. Well, that's going to skyrocket. A small percentage, less than 20%, don't see the government intervention so far as being effective. If you looked at the papers yesterday, you'd have seen, or this morning, you'd have seen Gabriel Faria speaking on behalf not merely of his chamber, but on all of the chambers. All of the chambers have more or less expressed doubt, concern, and some degree of criticism in terms of how the economy is going to be opening up. And almost 1/3 of all the organizations surveyed indicate that they have not been able to readjust their plans and have no business continuity measures in position. If you look across the world, all of the airline industries have started to return planes, lay off staff, lay off pilots, do everything along those lines. That's going to work its way right through the system, including hotels. Hyatt International, for example, have already indicated that they will be laying off staff, at least 15% of the staff at least. Now, this is how the government's measures have panned out. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, these are the announced measures, and you will see that they're less than 2% of GDP, although Mr. Imbert has indicated this week that his package is approximately $6 billion. Well, $6 billion is about 2% of GDP, but I'm not certain whether he's counting in that refunds of VAT payments. Now, VAT payments and a refund can't be part of a package, because really and truly speaking, what you're doing is repaying people money that you owe them. A package in this regard has to be what you're going to be doing that is different and additional to the issues that you're repaying people money that you owe them is not part of a package. So I'm waiting to see, we have to wait to see what the other measures are, because he did include in his statements on Tuesday, did include refunds of about $700 million. So that doesn't count. But this reflects a broad range of positions depending upon your fiscal situation, from a high of 12% in the case of Peru to less than that, in the trailing off below 1% moving forward. This is how the ILO has looked at it. They have identified 4 specific areas in terms of how you look at the government response, how you look at the country responses. And the country responses have been about stimulating the economy, Pillar 2, supporting enterprises, protecting workers in the workplace, social dialogue. Right? Important, and the measures that we're looking at on the previous chart would have been the measures which would be under Pillar 1, stimulating the economy, and a few of them falling under Pillar 2. But Pillar 3 and Pillar 4 remain areas for which in Trinidad, I would have to say at this stage of the game, there have been no announcements in terms of how we will deal with this, apart from a statement with regard to, we're going to enforce something with regard to wearing masks. So the questions that remain before us is time frame, right? These measures, how are they going to be introduced? What is immediate? What is short term? What is medium term? Which agencies are going to handle them? Who is going to benefit? This is one of the biggest issues, because across the world, the benefits have largely been rolled out to the registered taxpayers, as distinct from unregistered businesses and unregistered people who fall outside of the informal sector. So the question is, who is a taxpayer and who is not a taxpayer? Mr. Imbert, the finance minister, talks about people who don't pay the taxes. Well, it turns out that everybody in Trinidad and Tobago pays tax, every single one. We may not pay, if you want, employment tax, and that's where the hole is. but everybody pays indirect taxes in one form or fashion because everything you purchase has VAT. Virtually everything you purchase has VAT on it. So the country, almost everybody in the country is already paying tax in that fashion. When he speaks of the whole in the tax that he's talking about, unincorporated or the informal sector who are not part of the, if you want, PAYE system. Now, that's where the real difficulty is, and that's also creating some issues in terms of how you administer help across the formal, as distinct from the informal sector, the employed versus the unemployed. And I think that some of our panelists will be able to address this, but that's part of the issue because some of the people are falling out of the net. What also becomes important is the thresholds. What are the thresholds levels? What is the qualification standard? And also what following from that, how much? Now of the figure of the salary grant of $1,500, well, it turns out that a very small percentage of our population falls into that $1,500 a month bracket. Very small percentage. Well, it was meant to be assistance. It wasn't meant to supplement or alternatively replace what they were earning elsewhere. But the bottom line is that the calibration in accordance with the fiscal position raises a number of issues about what is just, what is important, how do you keep the economy going in the short run? And those are some of the issues that we'll talk about. So my purpose here was simply to introduce the ideas, right? But also to ask the question, you know, we're not certain how, you know, if you listen to the experts on BBC this morning, they're saying that this is going to last, this is a 2-year time frame, right? When you were talking about herd immunity and inoculation program, the development of a vaccine, this is going to cost anywhere between 2 and 3 years, right? So the issues are what is going to take place in between. How are we going to address payrolls? How are we going to address employment levels? What are the safety standards that we're going to put into position? How is that going to affect on the job, on the workplace, right? Who will survive from this point of view? Yesterday, they have announced some measures that at least the government did attempt to deal with the banking sector and the financial sector. But of course, we could all argue that some of those measures haven't really gone far enough. And if you went to a bank recently, they will tell you, if you're not a customer, we're not entertaining any new loans. What will be, you have to apply to get a deferment or moratorium period and also to renegotiate your loan. Now, when you think about it, you're really talking about the entire loan portfolio. Now, to get an entire loan portfolio, normally the renegotiations are distributed over the course of a year. All right. So you can't do all of this in 2 weeks, 6 weeks, or 3 weeks. So we are talking about a period of adjustment that is going to take time. So you can say that we are in a difficult situation, and you could find many different ways and many different words to talk about it. But the bottom line is that it cannot be fixed today. And we've already begun to see some of the initial announcements that come in from the committee have not met with favor. But the bottom line is you can't please everybody. So situation is going to pass. It's going to pass in the same way that kidney stone passes. It causes pain. And that is the process that we have to talk about in terms of how we treat with that particular matter. So I hope I have not exceeded my 10 minutes by too much. And I hope I provided some sort of context in which we could have this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. No, I don't think you exceeded. You did very well as far as time is concerned. So we'd now like to move on to, you can stop sharing the screen and we move on to Mr. Mario Alves. Mr. Alves is not going to be joining us by video this morning, but we will certainly have him speaking in a second or two. Mr. Mario Alves, known to many as the president of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union in Trinidad and Tobago. He has over 4 decades of experience in trade union activity. Mr. Alves is an expert negotiator in trade union and collective bargaining agreements, and he's currently leading approximately 6,000 members of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union. He's a well-trained expert and very knowledgeable trade unionist, and today we have him with us to give us his views on the topic of return post-COVID-19 employment and economy.
Good morning, and thank you, Stephanie. And let me just correct that I'm not the president, I'm the acting president of the union.
Acting president.
Yes. And flattery will get you nowhere, but all of those flattering remarks about my experience. But I suppose we will see where that gets us in the context of any engagement between the ECA and my union. Let me thank the ECA on behalf of my union for extending this invitation to participate in this roundtable discussion. And let me particularly thank Mariano for what I consider to be a very enlightening analysis with respect to the economic perspective and its impact in this particular situation of the pandemic. It is common knowledge that COVID-19 has disrupted economic activity and negatively impacted business operations and employment levels all over the world. And when last I checked, the ILO monitor estimated that worldwide, more than 436 million enterprises face high risks of serious disruptions. Hundreds of millions of jobs have been put on hold by COVID-19 shutdowns, and out of a global workforce of 3.6 billion or thereabouts, 1.6 billion people in the informal sector, and that is where we have the densest population of the working poor, are in immediate danger of losing their livelihoods. Trinidad and Tobago is not insulated from the impact of the pandemic. And as Mariano has pointed out, the pandemic coincided with a fall in oil and gas prices, energy prices. And without getting into any detail, an estimate by the Minister of Finance spoke to our fiscal deficit, Mariano spoke to it, for 2020 increasing from 5.3 billion to 15.5 billion. And this is made up of about, I think, 9.2 billion in lost revenue, and that is due to the collapse in energy prices, and another 1 billion in extraordinary expenditure. A leading economist on the government's road to recovery team warned that in consequence of what is taking place, a correction program is imminent in Trinidad and Tobago. He also warned that the short-term initiatives in the form of government grants and so on that have been implemented to mitigate the effects of the crisis in the short term cannot be continued indefinitely, and the road to recovery will be rough. And it is in this environmental context that I think that the role of key stakeholders to ensure recovery and sustainability of business and employment becomes so very relevant. I want to endorse here the sentiments of the Prime Minister of Barbados and the current CARICOM chair, Mia Mottley, in an interview on CNN International recently, a couple of weeks ago, I think, that the United Nations and the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, need to be repurposed to meet the needs of the international community and to develop a plan that protects not just the strongest amongst us, but also the most vulnerable. Similarly, I want to posit that there needs to be a repurposing of the mindset of the government, business, and labor in Trinidad and Tobago, if there is to be any recovery and sustainability of business and employment post-COVID-19. Mariano would have provided some significant detail in terms of that particular impact, and I will not spend time on it. What I would want to do at this point in time really is to refer to some antecedents. In 2000, in Trinidad and Tobago, there was an agreement in a declaration titled Compact 2000 and Beyond that committed signatory parties of government, labor, and business interests to engage in a collaborative effort to realize an agreed set of national objectives and to negotiate policies on the basis of those commonly agreed objectives. That project was stillborn. During the world financial crisis of 2008, both the then Prime Minister and the central bank governor of the time rooted verbally for tripartite consultation, and this too fell on barren soil. The current crisis presents an opportunity to make the talk of we are all in this together, to make that talk realize perhaps what has eluded us in the past, and that is to have this construct and to have this framework of a national compact or social compact, which seeks to address the challenges of business continuity, as well as maintaining and increasing, if we can, employment levels. And if I might borrow from a local commentator during the 2008 crisis, where he said, and I quote, "The present crisis presents us with a particular set of economic issues. And if there is the will among the interests, then at least we have the possibility of attempting to place on the national agenda a plan that is devoid, or rather that emphasizes not sectoral interest, but emphasizes the national interest. And I want to suggest that based on what Mariano has said, the responsibility that we have in the first instance is to bring the social partners together and to attempt to bring this construct into place, because if we do not do it, then I think that what is going to happen is that we are going to have a situation in Trinidad and Tobago where the very high incidence, and in my own view, it is high. We already have a high incidence of unemployment and underemployment in Trinidad and Tobago. We speak about an unemployment level, I think, of about 4.6%, but nothing is said really, based on the information at my disposal, about the high levels of underemployment. Nothing is said about the high levels of poverty in Trinidad and Tobago when we are dealing with the words of the politicians with respect to how they choose to sell what is happening in the country. Nothing is said about the issue of income inequality in Trinidad and Tobago. And all of these things really are going to be aggravated based on the current situation. And it is for this reason that I think that we really have to emphasize in the very first instance the need for collaboration amongst the social partners with a view to realizing the objective of placing nation first. I will say more on the issue of what we're experiencing as a trade union and what the trade union movement is experiencing in the world of work at this point in time as the discussion is engaged, but I will stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mario. So we now move on. Mario, we at the end of the three discourses, we will summarize and then move on into the questions. So please send your questions through the chat, so we'll have them ready for the panelists as soon as Mr. Nanku is through. So Mr. Nanku, thank you very much for joining us this morning. And let me just get a short.
Thank you very much, Stephanie.
Yes. So
And
Mr. Nanku is the chairman of the Employers Consultative Association and also a senior advisor at the Guardian Group. And I'll not say much more, very well known. He's in different committees and so relating to tripartisan in Trinidad and Tobago. And today he brings to us the view from the ECA and his own view as a well-experienced industrial relations and a leadership counselor.
oh, thank you very much, Stephanie. Good morning again to all you listeners and participants, and to my dear friend Mariano. It's always great to see you. Mario, really a pleasure having you supporting. You know, at one point, I think that Mariano, if I may say, should have been a human resource practitioner. He would, because he's such an excellent assessor of talent and so on. But we'll talk more about that at a later date. As an employers organization, we see this as one of our obligations to bring key stakeholders together in a concerted effort to find solutions that are not only effective, but are sustainable as we embark on this journey of recovery. Just to further reinforce the seriousness of the situation that the world has found itself, we face an upheaval that presents chilling parallels to the 2000 and 2008 financial crisis. Having said that, let me move quickly to the primary role and responsibilities of the employer in this process. And we see it as to provide a work environment that is safe and secure, to ensure that all protocols are carefully followed and adhered to. In this regard, a system of communication, ongoing collaboration is key. Employers are being urged to demonstrate a willingness to participate in meaningful conversations that are highly collaborative and quite naturally that embodies trust and mutual respect. The word social dialogue is again, and as Mario would tell you, myself, we have been through the last decade and more participating at various fora that spoke to social dialogue and its significance and so on. And again, maybe this is the time, because it's never too late, for employers to really look at the opportunity to make use of what I would like to describe as a very powerful vehicle, which is social dialogue, which embodies all the elements that to which Mario just referred. As far as possible, they should have in place a BCP plan. They should make efforts should be made to establish relationships with healthcare centers and facilities as we proceed or as we progress to on this journey of recovery. Given that fact, this is a highly evolving situation. It is reasonable, therefore, that key stakeholders will, as an integral part of the collaborative process, arrive in the first instance at a shared common understanding of the issues, challenges, and respective roles and responsibilities of each stakeholder. Because at the end of the day, we are talking here about the restoration of economic activity and to ensure that it's done in a responsible manner. At the end of the day, some of what we would be dealing with as employers and as key stakeholders is the emergence of a new culture and having to embrace the new realities of the world of work and how do we respond? Consistent with one of the questions that Mariano posed. Here are some considerations. Employers would be expected, again, working collaboratively with their employees or their respective RMUs where such exist, to speak to training, retraining, and retooling. Developing new policies aligned to these new realities. Policies such as teleworking, policies and guidelines. Considerations got to be given to change in employment standards and labor standards. And how do you manage performance remotely and manage for results? Having said all of that, friends, colleagues, as an employers organization, we are showing up with hope, and we are asking you to do the same. While a crisis is a time of intense difficulty, there are tremendous opportunities. Opportunities to grow and become better. Let's remember that every opportunity starts with some difficulty. Let's therefore embrace the opportunity to grow and become better. Adaptability, being flexible, is also going to be very important, since adjustments will be required by all parties. Let's keep in mind, growth is the only guarantee that tomorrow will be better. But let's not forget, we got to be intentional. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nanku. So now we move on to questions. I don't know if we have had many questions coming in, but I would like to pose a question or two to the panelists this morning. Mr. Brown painted a very serious economic reality about Trinidad and Tobago for us. And I think it's no secret of what's happening to our commodity prices and on where we are now as a result of the COVID-19 experience. We know for a fact that in Trinidad and Tobago, were we to have a really extensive number of cases, we probably could have been really limited in how we responded to that. So Mr. Brown, I want to ask a question. You talked about repurposing of the IMF and things like that. We are a free economy. Everybody wants to have their free will in our economy to do what you want, practice their trade, charge their prices, do whatever it is, employ as they wish. How do we respond to this crisis in a real way? We keep talking about everyone must come on board. How should business respond in a real way in bringing this recovery?
Well, I'll give you some material, some for instances. Some companies have been able to keep all of their staff on and keep them employed at the same levels. Some companies have already reduced by somewhere in the region of 30–40%. Keep the staffing levels, but reduce salaries. And I'm talking about from captain to cook. And the law firms in particular, and I've been in touch with a couple, the bigger ones, they have kept all of the employees, but they've cut salaries by 30–40%. And that means everybody is taking a 30–40% cut, partners included. Of course, those are the top end of the chain taking a 30% cut. You could argue that they have more disposable income to take to handle as distinct from those who are the bottom end of the chain. And that is the biggest issue that's going to be around the question of equity. What is required? What's the minimum required for people to survive? And where should it come from? Clearly in these circumstances, and there's evidence, certainly in terms of what is taking place in the US, in England, in China, the state has stepped up. The difference between Trinidad and Tobago and those countries is they have what is called sovereign currencies. In other words, they can afford to, anybody in the world will accept US dollars. They can accept yen, US, euros, and sterling. And probably the yuan or the renminbi is emerging as a reserve currency in that regard. But countries such as Trinidad, those of us who live in the developing world, nobody wants our currency, they want hard currency. So the biggest issue for us is going to be the issue of generating foreign exchange earnings to be able to pay for imports, because we have a high import coefficient. Out of every dollar that is spent, between 70 to 80 cents effectively is exported. That's the reality. Or in other words, we have to import most of what we have to do or we get. In those circumstances, you're really talking about an adjustment process that's going to affect everyone. Now, how is the state going to handle that? Well, you've seen, we gave the typography in terms of pillar 1, pillar 2, pillar 3. The initial comment was to recognizing how serious it was. They added banking sector liquidity to the banking sector to allow them to ensure that they had necessary resources to be able to deal with difficulty. But we now have the issue of timing. I was making the point that you can't review all of your loans in 1 week, in 1 month, or in 2 months, or in 3 months. It's going to take time for them to work their way through. And that's going to mean some are going to be more difficulties than others in the short run. So there's no easy answer to that. And quite frankly, it's just a process that you have to work your way through. Mario raises the point with regard to equity. The international institutions have put money on the line, but at the same token, those, I mean, the IMF, for example, is talking, I can't remember how many billion it was, but I mean, it was about, say it's 100 billion. By the time 50 countries apply and $1 billion between them, or $50 billion between them, when you're talking about 1 billion per country. Well, in a country with 1.4 million people, $1 billion US is a big thing. A country, but it's not so much in a country with 30 or 40 million. All right, so it's going to be difficult. There's a question of how do we have enough resources? How are those resources going to be shared? And everybody is compromised at the same time. So it's not a question that there's a fund somewhere that everybody could dip into and you'll get some out of it. All right, this is a thing that has to be scheduled. It has to, the priorities have to be decided, and those priorities are going to be done on the basis of market muscle. So a country such as Trinidad and Tobago, with a population of 1.4, you're talking about, in large measure, and in terms of the graduation principle, we have don't qualify for grants in that nature. Of course, we'll be able to get some special purpose items. The minister's already indicated that he's getting somewhere between $250 to $300 million from the multilateral agencies by way of special concessions and or by way of grant. Well, that's positive. But at the same token, that's short term. That's only for today. This issue is going to be a continuing one. So we have to start off with the presumption that we are all poorer. And therefore, we're going to have to make do with less. That's going to be a critical issue across the board. And that is a question of dealing with people's expectations and getting them to understand that we can't do all that we were doing before. That is going to be the biggest communication issue and the biggest, how shall we call it, biggest resolution problem, because everybody's putting up their hands. And the Minister of Finance said it yesterday. All right, he said that, everybody's come up with these requests. Everybody wants to postpone taxes. They want to postpone this. They want to postpone that. But I can't do it. If I postpone it, then I have no money to give you. All right, because I can't print it anymore. And for those who haven't noticed, there was a little article in the press over the weekend that essentially says that the consolidated fund is $41 billion in deficit. Well, what that really means is that over time, we've been printing more money than we've been earning. So this is a difficult situation. The measures are going to have to be calibrated. They're going to have to be communicated. And Mr. Als has put on the table the issue of the round table between the social partners in terms of how this is hammered out. That if it was stillborn before, it has to be put on the table now, because this is important for the communication exercise for people to understand where we are.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Brown. So that takes us to Mr. Mario Als now. So Mario, you mentioned social partners, you mentioned the tripartitism and things like that, and we have failed. You also mentioned something about Barbados. And the question is, what is different between Trinidad and Barbados in getting tripartism to work? We talk about everybody must understand. Mr. Brown took the time to explain that just now. We have a lot of outstanding issues in our labor environment in Trinidad and Tobago, but we understand the difficulty that faces us in this recovery if everybody has to get something out of it. Could you give us some response on that?
Well, I will try, but the first thing that I would say is that maybe that is the question of what is different about Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago is better put to Mariano than myself. He spent a lot of time there, as I understand it. Yeah?
Yes, he did.
But my own view is that Barbados has, and I wouldn't get into the history, but from the days of the plantation, Barbados has a different historical path to the rest of the Caribbean and to Trinidad and Tobago, notwithstanding the fact that they were a colony. And they would have had the opportunity to manage and administrate affairs even before we did. And I think that in terms of the Bajan work ethic and Bajan culture and that kind of a thing, when you land in Barbados, immediately as you land in Barbados, you begin to see that distinction between what I would describe as an ordered society and a society that is not as ordered. I just down at the granular level, the first time that I went to Barbados, the thing that struck me the most was the efficiency of the transport system. I mean, I could have jumped in a bus and it is on time and go anywhere, right? And I also think that the Barbados labor movement is a more cohesive and coherent labor movement than Trinidad and Tobago. We may be more militant, but I think that based on their background and their history and that kind of a thing, that they have been able to engage that process of social dialogue. They have been able to develop successive social compacts, and the evidence is there. In Trinidad and Tobago, we are very adversarial. You cannot get away from that. But I would also want to say at this point in time that the trade union movement is not averse to engaging in efforts at collaboration. We have never been, but it is not just the trade union movement. The other side has also been very hostile. And based on that twin hostility that we have to deal with, that what I have described as that adversarial relationship, I think that the time is now for us to begin the process of walking the talk. And I do think that critical to taking that walk is the role that the state is going to play. Keston can tell you that as far back as 2000, when that, and I think that the ECA was signatory to it, if I'm not mistaken, when that first social compact was developed, right? Trade unions and employers sat down and they discussed, but for whatever the reason or reasons, it was not initiated, it was not funded, and at this point in time, the sense that that we get on the ground is that all parties are willing to begin to engage this process of collaboration, given the very, very deadly effects. And I'm not just speaking about deadly effects in terms of people's health and lives. I'm talking about the deadly impact that it can have on the economy if we do not get together and seek to share this pain. Because Mariano is correct. The central issue, and I think that the most thorny issue that we will have to address after all of the economic plans are laid down, the economic and social plans are laid down, really. It will have to do with the question of equity. And he made a very, very important point in his contribution to the effect that people with, a man working, somebody who has an income of $100,000 a month, and somebody who has an income of $10,000 a month, taking 30 to 40%, taking a 30 to 40% cut on his salary. Life ain't the same for the both of them. You know? And that is where the question of the sharing of the burden has to be. In this country, I was looking at some statistics recently on the question of the poverty line in Trinidad and Tobago. And it says that in Trinidad and Tobago, this was a study that was done sometime in 2018 by, it was commissioned, I think, by UNESCO or the UNDP. And in Trinidad and Tobago, you have about 15% of the population being considered to be under the poverty line. You have about 1.6% of the population being considered to be indigent, that is needy, they need of help and that kind of a thing, because they're in an even worse position than those persons who would be described as being under the poverty line. And that translates itself in a population of 1.4 million to 200,000+ people. And we have to deal with the issue of those persons that are most vulnerable in our society when we are seeking to deal with the prescription that we all know will be painful. So that I do believe that, and I think that both Keston and Mariano would have pointed it out, that amidst all of the crisis, there's an opportunity for us really to demonstrate the will, because the will has to be there for us to realize the objective of coming up with this national plan.
Right, so we seem to be having some sort of synergy in the understanding and what is expected of us in going forward. So I want to pose this question to Mr. Nanku. It comes from the participants. Mr. Nanku, the panelists are speaking of social dialogue. However, the National Tripartite Advisory Council exists and functions. But when matters are sent to this body, they seem to linger and die a slow death. Is the adversarial relationship spoken about by Mr. Als the reason for NTAC's ineffectiveness? Mr. Nanku?
Well, Stephanie, and to the participants, the way I would like to respond to that question is that, as Mario indicated, there isn't a sufficiently high level of willingness or desire. We keep talking about national interest, but when you really examine it, lip service in reality is being placed to it. So in terms of NTAC, matters come before NTAC, and depending on the nature of the subject, there will be a lot of discussions and conversations. I would not say, I have not, since I've been there, witnessed anything that is adversarial. I've heard, whether it's labor or the government or, the employer, expressing views and perspectives. But at the end of the day, we are still far, far too far away from that consensus building, that level of collaboration that will bring us closer together. And I guess maybe this is the opportunity, as Mario said, the platform is burning, or the platform has burnt. Yeah. And therefore, maybe this is the time, this is the opportunity for social partners who are involved in the tripartite process to really decide to come together. And I think a lot of it, and I've said this before at the forum of NTAC, my personal view, having been involved successive governments with tripartism and all the rest of it, I've come to the conclusion that it is about power sharing, and parties to the conversation are not so inclined to give up power. Maybe this is the opportunity. Now that we have a difficulty facing us, we may grasp the opportunity. So let's see what it's going to bring.
Thank you, Mr. Nanku. So having heard that, we have a question for Mr. Als. Mr. Als, how can organizations who are looking at keeping 100% of their manpower while looking at the reduction of payroll costs amidst this unprecedented period, can they consider temporarily making adjustments to certain allowances granted to employees, such as traveling allowances, where staff is no longer required to perform such duties? This is a question for a trade unionist to answer.
Yeah, sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, I would first indicate that I don't know if the question is coming from an environment where there's a recognized majority union or not. Because if there's a recognized majority union, I think that what would have to take place, and I'm dealing with practical experience here, what would have to take place is that you would have to engage the trade union in a discussion with a view to seeking to address the issues. We are not running away from the fact that there is a considerable decline in business activity that is going to impact an enterprise's bottom line. And we are about seeking to preserve jobs. But the experience that we have been having is that many employers, even in areas where the union has recognized majority union status, where unions generally have recognized majority union status, they are not being transparent. And they are seeking to engage a process of a master and servant command style kind of arrangement, which it fuels the antagonism. If you come to the trade union, you sit and you discuss and you provide the information, then we could have some informed dialogue. And I think that in areas where, because we have been having a litany of complaints, scores of complaints from workers in areas where there is no recognized majority union, the workers are not unionized, and where the employers are simply imposing on the workers without any kind of a consultation, right? Wage cuts and what have you. But importantly, and I think that this is worthy of mention, one of the things that the pandemic has been teaching is that in many workplaces, employers have been engaging in a collaborative approach to deal with the issue of health and safety in the workplace on this particular issue. And it has been reaping results. We have challenges, there are issues, there are those who are not adhering to the standards and that kind of a thing, but there is a very distinct trend towards that cooperation, towards that collaboration in the workplace. And I think that it has been helping in containing the spread of the pandemic, because people understand just how deadly it is. And they understand that they have to work together. And what we learn from it, we can learn from it that if we do not approach the economic challenges and the social challenges in the same way via the process of social dialogue, if we do not do it, then the consequences are going to be dire. So that's my response to that. Engage the union, engage the workers if there is no recognized majority union, and let us deal with things on the basis of an informed deliberation.
Let me add 2 cents to that. I mean, I speak as somebody who's had to run organizations and had to deal with downsizers during the 1986 to 1990 period, as well as to deal with the period in its aftermath in Barbados as well. So I've done it in 2 countries. The reality is that you have to go to the organization and you have to come with a plan. This is what I want to achieve. This is where we are. This is what's required to survive. I think when you put it in those contexts, rather than come with some proposals, well, look, I want to cut this, I want to cut that. If you put it in the context of an overall plan and you essentially go to the stakeholders, because you have to engage the stakeholders. This is what is required to survive. They might not agree with you, right? But that's where you have to that's where the negotiation comes in. That's where the discussion comes in, right? Because you have to understand the picture. And that's where the issue and equity is found in those circumstances. Because once I understand what is taking place, what people seek to do is to preserve relativities, right? I don't want to be worse off than Tom, Dick, or Harry if they were in the same position as I am, and so on and so forth. So we all want some relativities to be underscored. But it has to be done in the context of a workable plan to address the future. Because we have to face it. If the business isn't surviving, right? It doesn't matter what happens, you're not going to have a job. So it's in everybody's interest to make certain that the organization survive. But what we want is we want to have some faith. Now, here's the problem in the context of Trinidad and Tobago. See that adversarial situation? It really speaks to a greater degree of trust or lack of trust in the case of Trinidad and Tobago. Case in point, in 1990, right, both the business sector and the unions would have marched in the street to tell the government, get it out of your head that you're going to devalue. The obverse of that is that both the unions and the businesses were prepared to accept a higher level of unemployment. They understand it. They will defend that $2 peg to the hilt. And that means if some people have to go home and less people work or we share the work, they will do that. You won't find that in the case of Trinidad and Tobago because there's no trust. Nobody's going to be leaving. Nobody's going to accept the fact that this rotation is in my favor or all of us will survive. That's the fundamental difficulty, the lack of trust. I want to put that on the table. And until and unless you have an environment in which we agree on certain basics, you will always find that there's going to be an issue about whether it's going to work or not going to work, or whether we're going to agree or not agree, and so on and so forth. So that's why I said we have to start off with the idea. Trinidad and Tobago is poorer. If we want to figure that oil and gas is going to help us get out of this, you can put that out of your head. That is not the situation. So we have to start talking about how we're going to craft a different future. Once we start off with that and we understand that as a possibility, then we could find an avenue to move forward.
So on that note, Mr. Brown, you're on the floor. You talked about relativities and you talked about survival again. Do you think that businesses, this is a question coming from the participants, businesses should be considering repackaging? In some cases, you have packaging in such a way that persons who don't have disposable resources cannot buy the size of the packaging, the goods. Do you think they should consider repackaging and repricing of goods and services to help stimulate the economy and to create some level of quality among the
I want to tell you that takes place automatically without you even thinking about it. You just talk to any grocery owners and you'll see, for example, some groceries, for example, particularly ones in Central, you see these big full page ads about what X, Y, and Z and so on. If you look at the packaging sizes, you'll see that they've moved away from pounds to half a pound. Essentially what they're doing is pricing to what you figure you can afford to pay for. Businesses do that automatically, particularly in food. In the market this morning, what the market vendors will do, I go to McCoy on a Thursday morning. What the market vendors were saying at 6 o'clock this morning is they have started to feel it in terms of volume of purchases. So prices in certain things were quite good. In some areas, the price of tomatoes, for example, is $5. Hasn't gone up. It's been at that price for X period of time. Pumpkin's a little bit more expensive, but it will come down. Cucumbers is $2. There are certain areas that are going to vary. There are certain things that are imported. So for example, dal. Dal, a 10-pound packet in the market generally sells for about $20. It's $50 because it's in short supply, but the price has gone up. Substantial price increase. But on the whole, on a wide range of vegetables, the prices are generally have kept in line, right? Those are the domestic prices. The stuff that is done and made in Trinidad and Tobago, green leafy vegetables, callaloo bush, pak choy, those are all within line. Right? Plantain is $2 a pound. The standard price for plantain wholesale has been $4. It's $2 now for the last month, right? So there's evidence that, how shall we call it, retailers, market vendors, those things will take place automatically. It is where there are shortages that prices are going to change. So those packaging and repackaging, all businesses want to survive. And if they recognize that customers have a smaller disposable income, they will repackage and repurpose to be able to do that without even being asked. It will just happen automatically. So that's not the issue to bother about. There are other issues. And the other issues is demand going to be sufficient? And if it's not, how many people do I need? What are the adjustments do we make? Do I reduce the salaries? And remember, we've been adjusting for some time now, Right? This is the 5th year of decline. This is not something that just happened out of the blue. What happens is the degree of decline this year is higher than any other time. And what is uncertain is how is the energy sector going to recover to pull us out of the jam. The petrochemical sector right now is on the wall. Look at the article by Curtis Williams in today's Guardian. He puts the issue very starkly. Right? The petrochemical sector could close down. 30% of our plants in the petrochemical sector are closed or idled, right? Don't presume that because we have an oil and gas economy that nothing could close, right? So there are some real issues here. When I say that we are poorer, I mean it.
I mean, serious consideration. So this is a question I want to throw it all between Mr. Nanku or Mr. Alza. or both of them could give their perspective on this question. You just heard about the adaptation necessary and groceries and retailers and so how they are operating. Do you believe that it is in the best interests of an employee to consent to the variation of the employment contract for less favorable terms? And this is in the context of COVID-19, of course. Either Mr. Alza or Mr. Nanku.
Well, I'd probably go first because Mario, I'm sure, would have a slight adjustment to the comment that I'm going to make. I am saying that in reality, we spoke about adjustments, and that is real. I mean, Mariano couldn't put it any other way. We are poorer. We are poorer. We are poorer. The time has come for us to come together if we are to survive, eat little, and live long. Okay? So taking back to the workplace and the employer-employee relationship, I am saying that as part of that adjustment process, but quite naturally it has to be done out of a collaborative process. I don't expect anyone, whether it's employer or as the case might be, to be saying, listen, we've taken this from you. This is an opportunity to have collaboration, to have conversations, to be open, to be transparent. I have found in my own experience that if you are transparent about matters of this nature, about equity and relativities and so on, it makes life so much easier. Parties to the conversation, the one who is receiving it, may not be happy, but you know what? The individual or individuals, because it was put on the table in the context of a real situation that you can relate to, then it's much more palatable. So I would like to say the answer is yes, but it has to be done in a proper manner, in a humane manner. That would be my contribution.
Mario, you want to add to that?
Well, I will pitch in and say that that isn't something that hasn't happened between trade unions and employers in recognized majority union environments in the past. It has happened. Sometimes it may have happened in the process of a war, yeah? But then at other times, you have had situations where, as Kirsten has indicated, employers have approached unions and consequent upon the sharing of information, but which is the exception rather than the rule, and transparency. Things are done. You know, I recall in 2004, I was participant, well, in an indirect way, to a process of negotiations in Grenada. And when the settlement was brokered, because it had to do with a subsidiary company, a company in Trinidad that had a subsidiary in Grenada. And when the negotiations were concluded and everything was signed on the dotted line, 2 weeks after that, Hurricane Ivan passed. Hurricane Ivan flattened Grenada, and the employer and union had to go back to the table and they reverted to the old order of things. But they reverted to the old order of things with an expectation that when things were rationalized and when things were improved, that the employer would have honored the agreement. But that did not happen, and we have so many cases of that kind of a thing happening here in Trinidad and Tobago. So that I think that the issue of because it is happening right now as we speak. It is happening, it has been happening, and it continues to happen because of the impact of the crisis. And I think Mariano would have referred to circumstances of persons taking wage cuts reluctantly. Nobody want to get a wage cut. But if the circumstances face you and you have to take the wage cut when that engagement takes place, then I think that that is what you will do. But there also has to be, in the view of the trade union movement, a fair distribution of the burden of adjustment. It can't be that you're asking me as the
Did we lose Mario?
that is where we will find considerable resistance in the engagement.
Okay, thank you, Mario. So folks, we had a very good discussion, and I'm sure lots of enlightenment and food for thought, healthy discussion among the panelists, and we saw some common ground, some common understandings. And that's a start, because Mariano talked about the lack of trust, we talk about transparency and so, and it seems to me that that is something lacking in our current environment, Trinidad and Tobago, when we compare to other places and so. And the way forward seemed to be where we must all begin that level of trust, be open, transparent, communicate, level with each other, and you know, aim for the common benefit of all. We have some hard decisions to make. It starts off with a mindset change. So we want to bring the discussions to a close. We wouldn't have been able to answer all the questions. We will try to find answers, and as we said, we'll share the link and perhaps send emails out to accommodate those who would not have had their questions answered. But I would just like to ask each panelist to give their closing comment based on the discussions, based on the questions asked, and where we see, where are we going as far as this recovery is concerned. Mariano?
Yes, well, thank you. Well, I think I put this on the table. The recovery is going to be long. Recoveries for a deep recession, such as the one that the world is going through, everybody's looking towards a sharp rebound, a V-shaped rebound, but that's not going to work for everybody. It's going to depend upon different countries and different positionings. So let's just say that this is going to be a 0.1% decline in world output as a result of the financial crisis in 2008 took approximately 6 years for us to recover from. Well, minus 3% will recover. We're talking about a decade. That's the reality. It's about a decade. So this is something we're going to have to work our way through. And in our own particular context, the additional complications are that we are dependent upon a sector which could be in sunset. This is the energy sector. So that this is also going to require a different set of thinking in terms of how we engage and repurpose and reorganize the society's productive capacity to address an uncertain world moving forward. So this is not that COVID is a difficulty, a short-term difficulty, but it is going to expose the other long-term issues. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mariano. Mario, could you share with us your closing comments?
I would want to reiterate something that I averred to earlier, and that is that the present crisis presents us with a particular set of economic issues. And if there is the will among the interests, then at least we have the possibility of establishing a protocol limited to how we manage the economy and the role of each of the interests in that management. And I think that that would be a good beginning based on all that we have said. Develop the protocols, seek to engage the process of nation building through the development of trust, through the development of transparency in our engagements, and other values that are so critical to successful social dialogue.
Thank you, Mario. So, Mr. Nanku, we are in survival mode, and hearing Mariano talk about 10 years because of a negative 3% economy, it worries me. So, Mr. Nanku, what's your closing comment?
Well, I think we should, this conversation was extremely useful. And I would like to encourage participants to, in fact, put the information, the facts that Mariano has laid on the table, and really do some more assessment of it so as to reinforce and bring home exactly or to influence what is required. Because at the end of the day, friends and colleagues, our collective successes or failures are inescapably linked to one another. And if we just reflect on the facts that Mariano has put on the table and the reinforcement from Mario in terms of the need for social dialogue and the need for us coming together, I think that we would be in a better place. We'd be able to grow and we would be able to get to a place that is well deserved.
Thank you, Mr. Nanku. So folks, as I said, we had a very good discussion, and I'm thinking that this must not be all just talk. That's what we do all the time, no platitudes or flattery or anything as we go along. But really, it's a time for us to act. And as the ECA, we have this round table today, but we are going to pursue some activity that will require some of you who are on the line, more of you of the society, and support from people like Mario and Mariano, because without the support of individuals like them, we are all going to have to, we will not reap the possible rewards we can from all these discussions, so that it's not just a matter of ending it here today, but really actively pursuing real, tangible ways of fixing this economy. Perhaps not in the way we might want it, but for a more equitable outcome for most of us. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you very much, Mariano. Thank you very much, Mario, Mr. Nanku, for taking the time to share your knowledge and to bring this discussion into reality today. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
My pleasure. Take care. Good seeing you again, Mariano.
Yes, thank you very